Are we live? Okay. Hello. We are starting the session, so I ask everyone to either sit down or go to the other room. Okay, well, let's get started then. My name is Carlo Martuscelli, and I'm a health policy reporter for Politico. And today we're going to be discussing the very difficult problem of obesity. It's an issue that's only worsened since the start of the pandemic. But even before that, obesity rates were only going in one direction, and that's all around the world, and that was up and up. It seems like a straightforward issue. Encourage people to exercise and to eat well, and the pounds melt off, or at least that's what we're commonly told. But the reality is actually very different. And decades of failed policy intervention show that. Scientists are just now beginning to understand the really complex interactions between our biology and our environment, which makes this such an intractable problem. The good news is that there is some change on the way, at least. A new class of drugs has been shown to be a safe and effective way to lose weight. So far, they've mainly been used to treat diabetes, but obesity is also being looked at. Now, the question of whether cash-strapped health systems are going to be able to reimburse them is a different one. But that will remain to be seen. I'm joined here today by Giovanni Gorgoni, Chair of the European Regional and Local Health Authorities. And online, we're joined by Elisabeth van Rossum, Professor and Endocrinologist at Erasmus University Medical Center, as well as MEP Pernil Weiss of the EPP. Thanks so much to everyone who's joining us here in the room and also online. I want to just remind the audience that you can ask questions through the SwapCard app, or you can tweet using the hashtag #PoliticoHealthcare. You can ask questions only through the SwapCard platform, so please go on our event's website if you want to ask questions. And if you're already on the platform, you can chat with other attendees and ask questions in the question box and below the live stream if you're viewing on your mobile. And for everyone who is here, Politico has provided you with flyers to use the SwapCard platform. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Elisabeth, I'd like to start with you, and if I could just ask you to put your scientist hat on and explain, just to set the scene, what obesity is and what makes it so difficult to treat at the biological level, especially just using the usual lifestyle interventions like diet and exercise.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question to start with, maybe, because also what we should realize maybe that is obesity is indeed recognized as a disease, and that's not so strange because if you think of fat mass as an organ, we know fat mass as an organ is producing hundreds of hormones every day and also substances which are very important for the immune system and for health. You can imagine that if you have too much fat, we know that the fat is literally becoming sick. So it becomes inflamed, it produces all kinds of substances that your brain and your body become sick. And it is literally also not only a disease by itself, but it's also a gateway disease to over 200 other diseases. And not only diabetes or cardiovascular disease, but also cancer, mental disease. And why is it hard to lose weight with just diet and exercise? Well, that's because once a person ever developed obesity, the body becomes sort of reprogrammed. The body will always remember the higher weight. And after weight loss, the body tries to get up to the higher weight. That's all due to a lot of complex hormonal regulation systems. But it's good to realize that because you can lose weight, but it's hard. And you need intensive lifestyle measures for a long time, lifelong. It's not like short-term diet and then stop, but you need to continue. And if that's not successful enough, you need additional treatments, which are currently more and more available. So yes, it's a chronic relapsing disease, and it has been recognized like that, but it has not been implemented in care as a disease.
And just to get a little bit of context here, how long has it been that we've developed this new way of understanding obesity? I mean, I imagine it's something maybe professionals have known for a while, but it's my impression it hasn't really penetrated the public consciousness yet, this kind of negative feedback loop, this hormonal shifts that make it so difficult.
I think that's right to the point, because that's one of the things is that we think too simple: just eat less, exercise more, problem solved. If that would be the only solution, people would already have done it. And also, but we know, and as a doctor, I'm not only a scientist, but also as a doctor, you see people struggling with them, even the ones who try to do the lifestyle interventions. And yes, some are successful. And even if you don't lose any kilogram of weight, still it's beneficial to have a healthy lifestyle. So for everyone, healthy lifestyle is good. But if you have obesity, do you normalize your weight? Often not only by only lifestyle. Some do, but some don't. And we often overlook that in policy. We just think too simple. If we look at it at the full complexity, then we can be much more effective in combating it. And it also shows how important it is to prevent that people develop obesity. So the people who currently have a normal weight, we need to prevent that they also develop obesity. But the persons who already have obesity, we need to treat them well and not say, oh, just go on a diet. And, we have to offer good care according to the guidelines. But that's not being done right now.
So I do want to go to the other panelists, but just before I do, a final question for now for you, Lisbeth. So what does work? And I realize you said lifestyle interventions do have a role to play, but do we know actually how to treat obesity? Because just looking at the obesity rates, kind of big picture, the demographics, it would seem that we don't.
That's a good point. It's like any other disease. You first start with what is the cause of the obesity? Is it a lifestyle-induced obesity, or might be a medication-induced obesity, or are there other psychological or social factors inducing it? Then you optimize the factors which are causing it. And of course, yes, the main cause is lifestyle, but in many patients there are many factors. After optimization, then you start, if it's a lifestyle obesity, you start combined lifestyle intervention, which is more than only healthy eating and exercising. It's also coaching on the mindset. It's a psychological stress reduction. It's sleep improvement. It's the whole life of persons. And if that's not effective enough, then you can consider, depending on the weight and the complications, then you consider obesity medication, or if it's severe obesity, to consider bariatric surgery. And just a tip of the iceberg of the patients who should have treatment according to guidelines will get it. And there are effective treatments more and more, but they're just in most countries not being reimbursed, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to return to that point on reimbursement. But before we do, Giovanni, I wanted to go over to you, because we've been talking about the science of obesity, but now I want to talk about the policy of obesity and what governments, especially local governments and regions, are trying to do to tackle the problem and also get a sense of the scale of the problem. So maybe before we get to the policy, can you just tell us some facts and figures about obesity that you're seeing regionally?
Yeah, thanks, Carlo. And if obesity is a complex and complicated matter from a biological point of view, if you look at the social, cultural, and economic point of view, it becomes more and more complicated. So let's start from few figures. According to the last global burden of disease of the Lancet at 2019, obesity is the 5th cause of death after high blood pressure all over the world, high blood pressure, smoking, air pollution, both indoor and outdoor, and high blood sugar. But if we consider obesity and the link between obesity and, for instance, high blood pressure and high blood sugar, and the other causes, maybe the 5 million deaths per year for obesity is underestimated. And if we consider the expenditure, according to a survey study along 52 countries from OECD, European Union, and G20 countries, almost 8.4% of healthcare expenditure is related to obesity. And 71% of healthcare cost for diabetes is related to obesity. 23% of healthcare costs for cardiovascular diseases are related to obesity. And 9% of healthcare costs for cancer is related to obesity. And we have not figures related to the healthcare cost for mental health related to obesity. So, other two figures. In the European Union, a woman with low income and low education is 90% more likely to become obese. And a man with low income in European Union, 50% higher with higher probability to become obese. So, I want to relaunch with the two crucial questions. Should we care diabetes or obesity? Should we care cancer or obesity? Should we care cardiovascular heart infarction or diabetes? Or should we provide bariatric surgery, or should we intervene on social determinants? These are difficult questions, and the approach must be partial, because obesity has a circular and spiral behavior. So the approach should be circular and spiral, intervening in many points of access, in many points of intervention.
Perfect. Well, Giovanni, thanks so much for that, because that takes me very naturally to Pernille, because you were mentioning just now the kind of trade-offs we have to factor in, and the kind of approach we have to take if we want to try and tackle obesity, including those social determinants. Now, the Commission has a large multi-billion EU health budget. They have various actions planned, including some planned for obesity. I wanted to know, Pernille, as an MEP in the interest group on obesity, what kind of work would you like to see the Commission do on the topic? And how can the Parliament put pressure on the EU for Health program and DG Santé in terms of rolling out some of those interventions that Giovanni was speaking about just now, especially because DG Santé seems like the place to tackle social determinants specifically. You know, they don't have a national health system. They can't manage hospitals, but what they can do is put together best practices and work on that level.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for a great question, and also thank you to the organizers of today to invite this issue on obesity on board, because it's so needed that we speak up the issues related to severe obesity, but also the fact that we are in a health potential crisis concerning obesity in the EU if we do not strengthen, and that is how I will try to answer your question. What can DG Santé and what can the European Parliament do to push this agenda, and also to come up with more concrete instruments to push the agenda and bring the figures down. And also to work, I very much welcome that proposal from Giovanni to work circular and in an upwards spiraling way, because it is needed to have a more holistic approach, a more generic approach. And what I hope that DG Santé will do, and that we can do together between the EP and, of course, the Envy Committee, where I have a seat, but also the upcoming report from the COVID Special Committee, is that we underline all the data that can support the fact that we need to do something, but also that we need to do a lot on a different agendas concerning obesity, because we are now focused and are using a lot of resources on the consequences of obesity, but we don't address the core roots. And that is where the Parliament, with our different committees, and especially Envy and Corona, the COVID Special Committee, can push. But also, I really hope that the Commission is putting extra effort, and hopefully also that they invite the Parliament to engage more in that, in order to give the member states wake-up calls of evidence, of data, telling them that they have a big task ahead of them, and also that the do-no scenario is not good for the healthcare profile of each country, but also that it will damage the productivity, and it will also bring down the economic, so to speak. It will be a burden to our economies around in the EU countries, if not, and that is my point, sorry for the long journey towards that, that we need to make the member states aware that they must acknowledge obesity as it is, like said by Lisbeth, a chronic non-communicable relapsing disease, but also that every member state needs, by acknowledging that, to reach out to each other and create a common shared language on both research and development, but also sharing of best practices, etc., etc. And especially every member state in the EU must make their own national obesity action plan, because we can't say that every health system works best in the same way in all 27 member states. But if we create a common shared understanding of the topic, but also methodologies and definitions, then we can begin to co-create, then we can begin to share best practices and really help each other with this very, very, very complex landscape of obesity. Also, in terms of making more colleagues of mine and also national and local politicians, give them more courage to engage in this topic, because it's still very much tied to taboos, and that politicians are afraid to engage in the obesity agenda, because they don't want, of course, to outshame voters and citizens in general. So there is a high level of ethical complications to that, also because you need to address this issue more openly and have more respect to the data, telling that we need to work much more in common, much more together on this agenda. So yes, we can do a lot, and I think data, that's a good point, research, good point, but communication, to make the awareness about the chronic nature of obesity and severe obesity, the non-communicable nature of obesity. I mean, I'm educated in healthcare, but it was also an eye-opener for me to catch up on what has happened the last 10, 20 years in research on obesity, that it is not only a matter of and it's for many people not at all a matter of just eating less exercising more, not absolutely in the contrary. So we need more knowledge to be shared, and that's a matter of good communication, but also facilitating of the dialogues in between political stakeholders, institutions, and so on and so forth. There's a lot to do. Therefore, it's also so wonderful that you have it on your agenda for today. And I also look very much forward to continue next year, also in the framework of the World Obesity Day in March. That is a good occasion to unfold this landscape even further.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that, Pernille. On the topic of courage and taking action, Giovanni, you're the CEO of the Puglia Regional Agency for Health. Now, I know Puglia has some quite difficult situation with obesity. Maybe it's a location that would benefit from a national obesity plan from the Italian government taking the issue really seriously. But first of all, what are the difficulties you're encountering on the ground at the local level, and what kind of solutions are you trying to implement?
Yeah, Apulia region is a good example of on how socioeconomic factors can affect or can determine obesity, on how obesity is, as I say always, a community disease and not an individual disease. Apulia region is a southern Italy region, a typical Mediterranean, South Mediterranean region with issues of social exclusion, of social deprivation, and so on. And the second cause of cross-border healthcare mobility between among Italian regions for Apulia region is bariatric surgery.
Sorry, Giovanni, can I just ask you to define that? So are you saying that the second reason that people from Puglia go to other regions for healthcare is for bariatric surgery?
Yeah. For bariatric surgery. And that couldn't be such a problem if we don't consider social implications and family implication of long-distance healthcare services. But if we consider that obesity is a lifelong matter that needs lifelong course intervention, even after, and above all after, a bariatric intervention for the next 5, 6, 7 years, you can understand how difficult it is to treat in a lifelong pattern. So 3 years ago, we decided to engage our value-based healthcare approach using just obesity to implement these care pattern through the previous and the early definition of a regional clinical network of care nodes of integrated, high specialized, and authoritative practice unit, integrated with other practice unit. And that's also the ratio informing the participation of RS Puglia and also Euriga in an ongoing project regarding obesity, a project articulated on 4 living labs. Living labs, the first regarding socioeconomic determinants, a second living lab regarding childhood intervention and early education to contrast and to fight obesity, a third living lab on value-based healthcare for obesity, and a fourth living lab for stakeholder marketplace. Because when we talk about obesity, we don't consider the role of commercial determinants and the role of food industry that feeds obesity and that feeds also climate change. We are talking about, again, of circular behavior.
Just to make that a little bit more concrete, when you say the commercial determinants in food, are we talking about like snack food aimed at children, or these kinds of, I don't know, cheap, mass-produced, very processed foods, just to get an understanding?
We are talking about high processed food, junk food, to acquire customers, to maintain customers, to maintain market, and this kind of food production is highly polluting. So, what is first, obesity or climate change? Climate change or obesity? And we can make other example of this kind also regarding the urban planning or the urban assets, or the actual or current traffic system, because long stay on car is a sedentarity. So we are coming back again even more to the example, to the metaphor I made, the circular and spiral behavior.
Well, I want to take that point and bring it to Lisbeth, because you called obesity a community disease, which it strikes me as exactly true, at least from what I know about it. And the more I read and research obesity, the more I understand it has this very complex element to it, both biologically complex, but also socially complex, environmentally complex, urbanistically complex, and so on and so on. But the paradox here, something that strikes me, is that, at least on the treatment side of things, not the prevention side, what to me seems to work is actually the very kind of brute physical interventions, the pharmaceutical ones and the surgical ones. It's a bit, as I mentioned, paradoxical. But Elizabeth, I wanted to get your view on this. I mean, how do you compare the kind of softer, let's say, obesity policy interventions, whether that's things like Nutri-Score, urban planning, sugar tax, maybe that falls a little in between, it's a bit more, hard, quote unquote, and then things like the GLP-1 agonist drugs or bariatric surgery? Or do you think it's wrong to even try and set up that contrast?
No, yes, very important question. I think we have the key point here, because as Trajani beautifully called it, community disease, which is of course important, that the whole community and all the environment is inducing obesity and is increasing the epidemic, but at the same time are so many other factors. And if you want, I think one of the things we need to do is actually to have obesity implemented under the NCD policy framework at the global UN level in 2025, in the EU Healthier Together initiative, to allocate really obesity roadmap as the per policy prioritized NCD framework by 2026. So what we have now, the situation that there are NCDs which are recognized and we are treating them, but obesity is an NCD as well, but we are not treating it as such. So basically, a person who is having obesity, we first wait until there's cancer or a heart attack, and then we start treating. What we should do is now looking at the situation. There is a tap wide open. Every day new people are developing obesity, and the community level is very important. Environment, food environment, we need to close the tap. That's universal prevention, primary prevention, we need to do it. At the same time, the bath is already more than half full. So more than half of the people in Europe has already overweight, or pre-obesity also called, or obesity. And those people we need to help. And there comes the story of indeed lifestyle interventions as a first step. And if not effective enough, then pharmacotherapy, so obesity medication or bariatric surgery, full package there in the treatment, empty the bath. but we only are effective at the same time if we close the tap. And closing the tap is a task for politicians. So I'm really happy, Pernille, to be here, and also Georgiana, that we can. We need policymakers all over the country, and not only voluntary measures like, making your marketing more towards healthier food and not towards unhealthy food, but really legislation, sugar tax. It should be prohibited that there's marketing on unhealthy food. Really hard measures on the prevention side, and at the same time, better implementation of the care which is currently available but not being reimbursed. And only if we close the tap and empty the bath, then we can combat the obesity pandemic all over Europe, which is an epidemic all over Europe, in every country, actually.
I really like that metaphor you just used of the tap and the bath, because it helps me understand where those softer measures are appropriate, which, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's at the kind of tap level. You can stop people from getting obesity, but then you need some of the more concrete or harder, let's say, interventions to actually treat people. Now, on the topic of treatment, I wanted to know if you could just speak a moment about this new pharmaceutical drugs, just because that seems to kind of be the big change in the treatment paradigm in the past 5 years. And the issue of reimbursement, because I understand that these aren't reimbursed in most of Europe for the treatment of obesity, more for diabetes. So what's the situation there?
That's very important, because not every country in Europe is recognizing obesity as a disease. Some countries are. For example, in the Netherlands or Portugal or Denmark, there is being obesity recognized as a disease, and it enables also to have proper treatments according to guidelines, and that really helps. And it should be. I mean, it's not a matter of where we should recognize it, because it's in European Commission, but also in the HWO, already recognized obesity. It's about implementing that recognition of obesity as an NCD, and not waiting until there's a next COVID pandemic or cancer increase. No, treat obesity as it is and prevent all the other diseases. So I think that's a very important step, what we need to do directly. And closing the tap, that's obviously a task for the politicians, legislation, and really making the food environment healthy at schools, starting at young age, but also at adult level, making sure working spaces are healthier, people are moving more, stimulate and having an environment which stimulates health rather than stimulates disease, which is the current situation. But emptying the bath, we should do it at the healthcare level. And I think there are very promising treatments. And yes, the pharmacotherapy, which is already available, is getting more and more effective. There are some effective medication right now, but you have to combine it with a healthy lifestyle intervention. That's still the bottom. First, the lifestyle. You don't want a person who's snacking all day and then having medication. It's on top of healthy lifestyle, but it's often needed. And when we look in the future, there are new medication is coming up with huge effects, like 20% weight loss on average, or that's huge. We have to balance though the costs of this medication for the future medication we don't know, and the number of people who need it, and we have to look at root causes like poverty and stress and social situations, And so we still, the message is we have to look at the whole package, social situation, medical situation, and treat where necessary, and recognize and implement it as an NCD and not stigmatize. Like Pernille said, it's a delicate topic. People often stigmatize. Well, if you know the complexity, and you shouldn't judge on people who have obesity.
Well, we're getting to the end of the panel, but just before we go, I just wanted 30 seconds. Pernille, you're our ears in the European Parliament. Do you feel like there's change? Are people talking about the topic, or are you still having to kind of shout to get heard about obesity?
No, actually, I sense a raise in awareness. Maybe not so much among my colleagues, to be honest, but when I talk with people who visit delegations who visit me in the parliament, but also when I go on my road shows back home in Denmark, that there are an increasingly interest and also an interest that tells me it's not that difficult and dangerous to talk about. So there are maybe some myths and biases in the political and in the media created realities that we as citizens, politicians, voters must talk up against and tell them, come on, there are facts that we can start the conversation about. There are dilemmas, there are paradoxes. I think actually that it could be possible to create this atmosphere of what I sometimes call the beautiful question. How can we actually address this without stigmatizing, bringing down the rate of people getting chronic situated with their with obesity, etc. But also, come on, I mean, we get fewer and fewer as Europeans. We get older and older, and we also get fatter and fatter. And by that, we are getting sicker and sicker. If we want Europe to continue like the Europe we know today, then we really, really have not to shy away from also sometimes topics that can be a little overcomplicated just when you look at it in the first time. No, I really think that citizens out there, they're not stupid. I mean, everybody knows someone in the family who has some kind of health issue related to obesity in a grade, and they are not afraid. They just want to listen to politicians and stakeholders who actually can co-create and talk about, so to speak, the elephant in the room. So yeah, I sense there is new waves coming in over Europe, thank God.
I love to conclude on an optimistic note. So thank you so much, Pernille. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Lisbeth. It was a really interesting discussion. I think we learned, obesity is a disease. It's very complex. It's misunderstood. And it's up to policymakers to turn off that tap, to try and make a difference when it comes to the obesity rates, and also to try and make a difference when it comes to obesity treatment. So I'd like to thank the panelists one more time for joining us today. That sums up our first day of the summit, which almost comes to an end. I would like to thank everyone who has joined us, both in person and online as well. And I want to thank our partners for making this event possible. The leading partners are Janssen, EFFIA, Pfizer, while the presenting partners are Bayer and Teva, and we have networking partner, the Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association. For everyone who's still with us, on site, there are 2 roundtable discussions. The first is on substances of human origins. It's in the room adjacent to the stage. That one over there. And Sarah Tayseer will be moderating that. She's over there. We also have a discussion on telehealth, which Ashley will be moderating, and this one is online. Both of them are taking place in a few minutes at 5:10. After that, we will have networking drinks followed by standing dinner at 6, and the event is going to continue tomorrow at 9 a.m. Big thank you to everyone.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.